story for you, which is a difficult one to report. A new US government report has revealed that suicide now kills more Americans than car accidents. In 2010, there were more than 33,000 deaths from car crashes compared to 38,000 from suicides. Most surprisingly, the study showed a major increase in middle-aged people taking their own lives. Over the past decade, there's been an almost 30% rise in the 35 to 64-year-olds taking their own lives. The rate for men has increased more than 27% and women more than 31%. And this is an interesting fact. This is in the US, of course. The rate of suicide by Native Americans, some 65% higher, followed by white Americans, with deaths surging by 40%. What's the reason for this surge? Let's bring in Dr. Paula Clayton from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I want to start in the States, but then take a sort of wider remit on this. What, firstly, do you think is behind what is a significant rise?
Well, we don't know exactly, but of course the explanation includes sort of the unemployment and the economic downturn, because unemployment is always associated with higher suicide rates because people don't have the money to go to doctors and to get care, and so they put off everything. Plus, they just can't afford to. Yeah, and then recently.
Sorry, let me stop you there, because I think most of our viewers will say, all right, I get that. 2010. You know, really the sort of pit of what has been this economic downturn. But it's been interesting to see that this is a problem, that of suicide, that's mostly associated with teenagers, and yet you see these numbers are quite startling in what is the baby boomer generation, the sort of middle-aged generation. Were you surprised by that?
Well, because it started in '05 at least, I'm not surprised. Actually, adolescents have lower suicide rates, but because there's so much lost when an adolescent dies, we put more effort into that. The elderly used to have the highest rate, especially elderly white men, but this new group is a surprise. And it's a surprise also because it's men and women.
Stay with me for one moment. I just want to give our viewers a sort of wider context on this. This was a report out of the US, but let's compare it with how we see the numbers in Europe, for example. For every 100,000 people, the US has an overall suicide rate, I'm afraid to say, of 12.4%. I mean, I was shocked to hear that. In Europe, it is some 10.2% better, but not good, of course. That may look good on paper, but CNN has previously reported on the alarming rise of suicides in debt-stricken countries in Europe. Just last month, Ben Wedeman reported on a triple suicide in Italy as a result of financial desperation. Have a listen to this.
Police say the couple took their lives last Friday, no longer able to make ends meet, shocking a nation gripped by its worst economic crisis since the Second World War. 62-year-old Romeo was the victim of austerity-inspired reforms, raising the retirement age from 61 to 67. He held occasional odd jobs, but couldn't make the payments that would have allowed him to eventually collect a pension.
Romeo's brother-in-law took his own life when he found out the couple were dead. And last year from Greece, Matthew Chance reporting on a similar story.
Dimitris Christoulas was a 77-year-old pensioner who stood in front of the country's parliament and shot himself. It was, he wrote, his only dignified way out, or else rummage for food in the garbage. This is no isolated death. In the offices of this charity suicide helpline in Athens, counsellors talk of an epidemic sweeping the country. Suicide rates have doubled, they told me, because of the Greek economic plight.
Paula, you're from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, which to many people who are in a terrible state must seem like almost an oxymoron, suicide and prevention. But what do you tell people?
Well, I think the most important thing is that, and these two people might illustrate it, that people who die by suicide usually have a mental disorder, and its most common is depression. And so if you learn to recognize and treat depression and can overcome people's shame and stigma about seeking help, then I think there's a really hopeful note about the future. And
but that's
really
that's really difficult when we're seeing this increase in suicides over a period of economic difficulties, because those who are possibly taking their lives, who may come to you ahead of that and seek advice, they won't have mental problems, will they? They're simply in a terrible position.
No, actually, they mostly do have depression.
Oh, that's
even the families say, oh, he had nothing, but then when they go through their emails and other things, they discover all the sad and depressing thoughts these people had.
That's fascinating. Paula, thank you for that.